Hello and welcome to the Sisters for Fitness Wellness Show. I'm Stephanie Gaines-Bryant. Today we're uncovering some Black history. We're talking to Elizabeth Comer. And Elizabeth, tell us where you're from.
I'm with the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society in northern Frederick County, Maryland.
And tell us exactly what do you do at the Catoctin Furnace?
I'm currently the president of our organization. We are an all-volunteer historical society.
And what is exactly took place at the Catoctin Furnace? What was it used for?
Sure. At the time of the Revolution, in 1776, actually just 8 days after signing the Declaration of Independence, Catoctin received correspondence asking how quickly they could make cannonballs, shells, stove plates, pots and pans, and all kinds of things that were needed for the war.
So what role did African Americans play in building these things, in creating these things?
Well, that is the most interesting part of Catoctin, in my opinion, because the majority of the workers, the skilled iron workers at Catoctin, from the time of the Revolution through about 1840, were enslaved and in some cases freed African Americans working at the furnace as colliers, miners, fillers, forgemen, teamsters, also working in the mansions of the owners of the furnace, working in the fields, in the vineyard, with the animals. So doing all kinds of skilled jobs. As I always say, there's no such thing as an unskilled iron worker. All these jobs were highly skilled.
So did these people learn the skills from the countries they came from, or did they learn the skills when they came here?
That, of course, is a fascinating question that we are attempting to answer. We believe, however, based on some evidence from Virginia, not from Catoctin, but from Virginia, there's an ad for a gentleman who is described as a skilled blacksmith iron worker. He did not speak English. He spoke in his native language, but he was highly skilled, and his the ad that was placed by his owner, quote unquote, said how skilled he was and that he had learned this in his own country. In Africa, iron making was very prevalent, and that's kind of an understatement. Basically, throughout the continent, there was a tradition of iron making skills. And so I use this analogy. I grew up on a farm. I'm not a farmer, but I know what a harrow is. I know what a wagon shed is. I know how to milk a cow. I don't do it. I live in the city, but I certainly have that knowledge from my childhood and from my family. So you can imagine that before African Americans were captured, grabbed, transported against their will from their home country, if their father, grandfather, uncle, mother, were working as either a collier or in the iron furnace, you would know it, you would see it, and it's also very possible that you had actually developed those skills before you came. So this is one of our main research topics right now, knowledge transfer of iron making skills from Africa to the young United States.
What particular countries would you say these workers came from?
Our initial evidence indicates that we have individuals from what is now Nigeria. We have individuals who are from the Wolof area. And they're actually from many parts of Africa, in the area of what is now Ghana, the Ivory Coast, as well as further east and further south, where in Mozambique and other parts. So we have evidence of African ancestry based on our DNA from a myriad of sites and areas of the continent of Africa.
How many would you say worked at a particular time? How many would you say came through over these decades?
Well, we, again, one of our ongoing research projects, because unfortunately, one of the tragedies of enslavement, one of many tragedies, is that there was not an attempt or even a will to keep accurate and thorough records of the enslaved. We have been able to put together 271 first names of individuals who are at Catoctin, and we know this from land records, from wills, from diaries, from baptismal and marriage records at the nearby church, and also from a manumission record. So we have 271 first names, and those appear to span or do span about 60 years.
Now, can you imagine what that multiplies into as far as relatives who are living today who are connected to those people?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that question, because that's one I can answer fairly or very accurately based on our research at this point. We have undertaken a DNA study with the Reich Laboratory at Harvard and 23andMe, and using that direct-to-consumer database, which is worldwide, we have located, or we have identified, nearly 42,000 connected individuals to the enslaved at Catoctin. Now, of those 42,000, we have identified 2,975 direct descendants. So this would be, for instance, a great, great, great grandson or granddaughter of an enslaved iron worker at Catoctin.
What do you think that means for these descendants? I mean, that is just such incredible information to have about your background, about where you came from, especially for African Americans. You can trace your ancestry back, but a lot of times, since a lot of records weren't kept, we don't know. You can only go back so far. So what does this discovery mean?
Well, that is, of course, what is so valuable here, in my opinion, to the African American community. And as Skip Gates always calls it, the brick wall of African American genealogy, because you get to a point in the mid 19th century when names are just first names, if they're named at all. We have many records that just mention that there was an individual, but they don't even tell us whether it was a man, a woman, an age, much less a name. So this research that we're undertaking is actually, and this is not an exaggeration, it's groundbreaking, because we, using a direct-to-consumer model like 23andMe, which has millions of DNA kits within their database, that group of individuals can potentially connect themselves to this enslaved population at Catoctin. And ultimately, our second research angle here is to follow those individuals back to their ancestral roots in Africa, and see where the iron making skills were coming from that then came to Catoctin. So it is an incredibly important discovery, if you will, that we have made, and it's never been done before. We're using a new procedure called identical by descent, IDB, IBD. And identical by descent compares exact chromosomes, and the longer the strand of chromosome that is identical, the closer you are related to that individual. So this is just not comparing mitochondrial DNA or some of the other methodologies that have been used. This is a new and different procedure, and it's becoming, it's obvious that it's highly successful because we've been able to identify nearly 42,000 connected individuals and 2,975 direct descendants of the enslaved buried at Catoctin.
What made you all take on this project?
Well, my background as an archaeologist and historian sort of gave me the skill set to start this process 11 years ago. I knew that the cemetery had been found in 1979 when a roadway was being constructed. I knew that 35 graves had been excavated, and I knew that now in the 2020s we had the potential of DNA. In 1979, when the excavation took place and the analysis was done, and it was done very well by 1979 standards, but we didn't have the toolkit of DNA at that point. So I knew that this potential existed, and I thought that this would be a way to bridge this gap, get beyond this brick wall. I also knew that, as an European American, I'm not a Mayflower descendant, but I know that there's a group of people who trace their ancestry to the Mayflower. And I thought to myself, why should that be merely a European privilege? Why can't we have a group of individuals from Catoctin that is akin to the Mayflower Society? Call it the Catoctin or the Iron Society or something like that. But I knew that the potential existed because of my background in archaeology and history. And so I looked for the grant money. It took 3 tries to find it. Eventually, I did get funding, and I began the process 11 years ago.
From what you've discovered, from what you've seen, you wonder what was life like back in those days? Because I'm sure life was different from the people who were enslaved, who were working there, opposed to the people who were free and working there. Did you have any idea of what life was like for the people back then working at Catoctin?
Well, we actually do, and I'm really glad you asked that question, because through the science of forensic anthropology, our team, which includes forensic anthropologists from the Smithsonian Institution, and I must say, I give a shout out because they have curated the remains of the individuals from Catoctin since 1979 in an excellent and very careful, if you will, environment. So the forensic anthropologists, and I am not a forensic anthropologist, I'm an archaeologist, but I know that they have been able to identify disease. They've been able to identify, of course, ages, the gender of the individuals. And because of our DNA analysis at Catoctin, we've been able to identify 5 nuclear families within the cemetery population. And so that's moms and children, brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles. So we know a great deal now, or of course more than we did, about the family units at Catoctin. But the main thing the forensic anthropology analysis has shown us is how dirty and dangerous and hard the work was at Catoctin. And I'm going to give you an example. We have a 15-year-old boy. His backbone, his spine is already compressed. The vertebrae are already compressed through hard, repetitive labor. Now, he's at the age of 15. Babies are weak, they're small, they're more vulnerable to early death. When you get old, you die. But when you're a teenager, you're at the, you're strong and healthy, and if you get sick, you rest, you get good food, you can, hopefully recover. We have a very high percentage of teenagers in our cemetery, boys and girls, and their bones show incredible stress and labor, overwork. I don't want to exaggerate, but work to death.
Wow, because that's what I wanted to make sure I pointed out, that these are people we're talking about who had lives, who had children, who had spouses. These are individual people.
Yes, and when you come, if you come, and we hope you do, to the Museum of the Iron Worker at Catoctin Furnace, you will be able to look into the eyes of two of these individuals. We were able to, again, get a grant to make forensic facial reconstructions of two of the individuals, the 15-year-old boy that I just spoke of, and a 30 to 32-year-old mother who is buried with her infant son. She probably died in childbirth, and the infant lived for a few more months, but then unfortunately he died, and he was buried just above her. And then her brother is dead also as a toddler in the cemetery. And yes, these were people who lived and loved and worked and died, and our job, in my opinion, is to tell their story, to use the science that we now have in 2023 to reveal as much as we can of this lost and stolen legacy of African Americans. And I have to tell you, the wealth and power that these enslaved workers made for the owners at Catoctin was massive. And that credit and that legacy needs to be known, needs to be taught, needs to be shared, because we've overlooked it far too long, and we're not overlooking it anymore. We say at Catoctin, we tell the truth, and the truth is that the power and prestige, we had the first governor of Maryland. Talk about power and prestige. How did he get there? Well, when you're making all kinds of money because you're not paying your workers and they're highly skilled, this is what, this is the result. But the workers have never gotten the credit that they deserve.
Now, Elizabeth, who were the owners?
The owners initially were the Johnson brothers. And Joshua was in London at a trading house, and Thomas and his brothers were here in Maryland operating the furnace. And as I said, making lots of money. And Joshua's daughter, Louisa, became First Lady of the United States. So, again, from the point of view of power and prestige created by the efforts and the skills of the enslaved iron workers, you have a governor, you have a first lady, and another relative that we have is now the president of the EU. She is related to John Bryn, who was an owner from 1820 until his death in 1832. So even today in 2023, the power and the prestige and the wealth of Catoctin continues to be manifest throughout the world.
Where does your research go from here?
In so many directions. We have been so lucky in the past week to have received a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. So we're going to be able, and I think I mentioned earlier, we're an all-volunteer organization, but we're going to be able to hire what we're calling a descendant communicator. And this person will be able to work with us to speak with the descendants who are coming forward using their DNA to learn about their ancestors. And we will be able to work with them on their individual genealogy and their connections with Catoctin. And just, every morning I wake up to a Facebook post or an email from someone saying, hello, cousin, to another cousin that they never knew existed, but they're finding each other based on their mutual connection with Catoctin. It's amazing. It's amazing to see this happen.
How do people find out whether they do have any connection? How do you find these cousins?
Well, that is, we're utilizing the DNA research, but we are about to launch a new historic genome app, I guess you would call it, or a procedure, which right now we've been able to demonstrate that we can make these direct and collateral connections to Catoctin. The next step is to be able to take an individual's DNA and compare it to a living person's DNA and compare it to this ancient DNA using identical by descent. And we're hoping that we will be able to begin that process within the next couple months. So that is our next big sort of launch, if you will.
Elizabeth, as an African American, we were talking before, you feel like your history is incomplete. This gives me such a feeling of satisfaction to know that some people, they'll be able to fit some pieces to the puzzle. So this is such good news. This is so incredible, so groundbreaking. How do you feel about that?
Well, it gives me goosebumps, because it's all I want is for people to be able to come to Catoctin, walk those grounds, see the landscape, and say, my ancestors built this. This is what they did. One of the things that people have told us is that they never knew about industrial slavery and these skill sets that we believe came from Africa and were transferred to the United States. People think of enslavement, it was all horrible, but people think of it as an agrarian enterprise. And yet at Catoctin, we're able to reveal a completely new narrative of enslavement, which is skilled ironworking. And that, having a chance to share that with people and let them know that their ancestors contributed so much to the United States, to our industrial revolution, to what we have become, that to me is the most important part of this. On an individual basis, being able to say, this is your legacy, and this is what you can be proud of. Not proud of being enslaved, of course, but proud of what your ancestors accomplished and what they contributed to the United States.
And like you just said, there has not been enough discussion about industrial slavery. When you think of slavery, you think of people being on a plantation, but this opens up a whole nother area that has not been discussed as much as it should be.
Exactly. And Catoctin is the place that you can visit and you can learn about that legacy. And even if your ancestors were not at Catoctin, collectively, as a collective group, African Americans in the United States can embrace this legacy and that what their ancestors contributed to, to our world.
We mentioned it earlier in the show, but tell us where you're located, exactly where you're located and how people can visit.
Sure. We're in northern Frederick County. We're in a little village, which is unincorporated, called Catoctin Furnace. And I'll spell that. It's C-A-T-O-C-T-I-N.
Please do.
Yes, Catoctin Furnace. And our Museum of the Iron Worker is open now. Our winter hours, fall, winter, spring hours, are Saturday and Sunday from 10 to 2. In the summer, we're able to be open 5 days a week, but throughout the rest of the year, only on the weekends. However, we do have the opportunity or the ability to do special tours anytime with, a little bit of notice. But the site itself, which is part of Cunningham Falls State Park, in Maryland, in Frederick County, that is open dawn to dusk every day. So you can go anytime, walk the African American Cemetery Interpretive Trail, read the waysides, learn the history of Catoctin, see the Isabella Furnace stack. You can visit the village anytime.
Very
but if you
good.
Want to come to the museum, and we hope you do, to learn about the history of iron making and the specific work that was undertaken at Catoctin and see the forensic facial reconstructions, either call us or email us for a special tour or come on the weekends 10 to 2. We also have a lot of big special events. And so if you go to our website, which is
and we'll give that
information.
We'll give that information at the end of the show, but I want to thank you so much for joining us this morning. We've been talking to Elizabeth Comer. She's with the Catoctin Furnace, and I will get it right before the show is over. Thank you so much. We appreciate your information. Have a great day. This has been the Sisters for Fitness Wellness Show. I'm Stephanie Gaines-Bryant.